A black veteran stood in the crowded airport terminal, the bustling chaos of travelers rushing past him. Despite the cacophony of announcements and conversations, a subtle tension simmered. His posture was upright, his demeanor composed, but there was an unmistakable air of unease as TSA agents glanced in his direction repeatedly, their whispers trailing like unseen threads in the air. He had faced far worse in his lifetime, battles not just on foreign soil, but within the country he swore to protect. His chest bore silent testament to his valor. Yet today, none of it seemed to matter. The color of his skin spoke louder than any medal ever could. A young woman in line nearby glanced between the agents and the veteran, her brows furrowing in confusion. Others averted their eyes, either unwilling to engage or too preoccupied to notice. The agent's approach was direct, their request laced with suspicion. "Sir, we need to ask you a few questions." The veteran's jaw tightened, though his voice remained calm. "Is there a problem?" The agent's gaze remained steely. Routine procedure. But both of them knew better. Words were necessary to understand what was unfolding. The veteran knew the script well, had lived it too many times before. And yet, something about this day felt different. He was no stranger to scrutiny, but the indignity of being judged after all he had sacrificed gnawed at him. As he stood by the screening area, arms outstretched for an additional pat-down, a TSA officer noticed something gleaming under his jacket, the unmistakable glint of the Medal of Honor resting against his chest. It was a rare sight, a decoration bestowed only upon the bravest of the brave. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. The murmur ceased, replaced by stunned silence. One by one, gazes fell upon the medal, a symbol not just of bravery, but of sacrifice beyond comprehension. "Sir, is that—" one of the younger officers stammered. "Yes," the veteran said quietly, his voice unwavering despite the turmoil within. Recognition swept through the room like a wave. It was no longer just a black man under scrutiny. It was a war hero standing tall despite decades of injustice. The scene transformed before their eyes, not from his doing, but from the medal's presence, forcing a reconsideration of every assumption they had made. The agent, now visibly unsettled, cleared his throat. I apologize, sir." The veteran gave a slight nod. It was never about an apology. It was about dignity, respect, fair treatment. All he ever sought was to be seen as a man first, a man who had given his all for a nation that still struggled to see him clearly. As the scene settled, murmurs of admiration replaced earlier whispers. Fellow travelers cast him appreciative glances, some offering silent nods of respect. The young woman who had earlier witnessed the ordeal spoke softly. "Thank you for your service." A TSA supervisor arrived, further apologies tumbling from his lips, but the veteran remained silent. His expression revealed what words never could. Acknowledgement after insult is not the same as respect freely given. Though the moment passed, the experience lingered, etched in memory as a microcosm of a larger struggle. How many others stood unnoticed, unrecognized, their contributions overshadowed by prejudice. How long would it take for merit to be the only measure of worth? Even as he boarded his flight and settled into his seat, the veteran's thoughts returned to the lesson born of that airport encounter. The work of progress is never done, but dignity, when demanded, often lights a path others cannot ignore. His story became a symbol not just for one veteran's journey, but for a nation's ongoing reckoning with fairness, respect, and the courage to confront its own biases. Despite the seeming resolution, the incident at the airport weighed heavily on the veteran. It wasn't the first time he'd faced such treatment, and deep down, he knew it wouldn't be the last. No medal, no accolade could shield him from the societal biases still entrenched in everyday interactions. The young woman from the airport, now seated across the aisle, continued to glance his way with a mix of curiosity and admiration. Her phone vibrated with messages as she drafted a social media post, carefully recounting what she had witnessed. Within moments, her words sparked conversations far beyond the airport's confines, conversations about race, respect, and the treatment of those who had given their all to protect freedoms that some took for granted. The veteran's face, however, betrayed no sign of the viral stir now unfolding. His focus remained on the broader issue, one not confined to a single airport or a single experience. Racial profiling in public spaces, particularly airports, had long been a point of contention. Travelers of color routinely reported being targeted for additional screenings, facing suspicion without cause. Reports and studies had highlighted these disparities, yet tangible change seemed elusive. The veteran's story, now shared widely, reignited debates about the policies and practices that contributed to such discrimination. As discussions unfolded online and in newsrooms, voices from both sides emerged. Some dismissed the incident as an isolated misunderstanding, while others pointed to systemic issues that demanded immediate reform. The veteran's silence on the matter spoke volumes. He had lived these contradictions for years and knew the complexity better than most. Meanwhile, back at the airport, officials convened to address the growing backlash. The TSA released a statement acknowledging the incident and reaffirming their commitment to equity and fairness in screening practices. Words were easy, but action was the true test. "We need to do better," one senior official admitted during a meeting. "We've said it before and we'll say it again, but this time we need to mean it." The challenge was not simply about changing policy, it was about changing culture. For too long, unconscious biases had gone unchecked, subtly influencing decision-making processes, even among well-intentioned professionals. Several advocacy groups seized the moment to amplify their demands for better training and accountability within security agencies. "It's not enough to celebrate veterans when it's convenient," one activist declared. "We must confront the realities they face when society forgets their sacrifices simply because of their skin color." At the heart of it all stood the veteran, resolute and unwavering. His intention had never been to ignite controversy. He had lived his life with quiet dignity, refusing to let bitterness consume him despite countless injustices. And yet, he understood the power of his story, how it could serve as a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths that many preferred to ignore. Back in his hometown, a local veterans group organized a community gathering in his honor. The event quickly transformed into a broader conversation about racial justice and respect for all who serve. Fellow veterans of color shared their stories, voices resonating with the same themes of courage met with prejudice. One by one, community members rose to speak, their voices weaving a tapestry of experiences shaped by both triumph and hardship. "This isn't just about one man's journey," one speaker noted. "It's about how we value each other as human beings, regardless of titles or medals." Through these moments of reflection and shared experience, a newfound sense of determination emerged. What had begun as a painful encounter at an airport evolved into a collective resolve to push for meaningful change. As the veteran's story continued to resonate nationwide, journalists sought to uncover more details about the incident and his life. Who was this man who had quietly borne the weight of a nation's honor while enduring its prejudices? News anchors spoke reverently of his service, his bravery in combat, and the Medal of Honor he wore with understated pride. Investigative reports pieced together a history of valor in battles long past, stories that highlighted his courage under fire, his leadership when comrades fell, and the moments when he stood against impossible odds. But alongside those tales of battlefield heroics were quieter stories, ones of resilience off the battlefield. Moments when he faced racism upon returning home, denied basic services, or ignored in spaces that should have celebrated him. "I fought 2 wars, he told one reporter in a rare interview. "One for my country and one for my dignity." As more people learned of his journey, conversations expanded to examine broader issues of racial inequality in the military and veteran care. Historians detailed the struggles faced by Black service members throughout U.S. history, men and women who fought courageously, only to return home to discrimination. The stories of veterans who endured similar indignities became part of the narrative, further illustrating the systemic challenges long overlooked. Among those interviewed were veterans who shared accounts of the subtle and overt racism they encountered, even within the ranks of military institutions sworn to uphold honor and equality. Their testimonies painted a picture of courage not only in war, but in everyday life as they sought respect for their contributions. Meanwhile, advocacy groups for veterans' rights joined forces with civil rights organizations to push for increased awareness and policy changes. They demanded stronger measures to combat racial bias within public institutions and improve training for personnel in security and service roles. Petitions circulated calling for accountability and transparency in cases of racial profiling. The airport where the incident occurred became a focal point for these discussions. The TSA, under mounting pressure, announced plans to conduct an internal review of its screening procedures, particularly focusing on racial equity and fairness. "We're committed to learning from this incident and improving our practices," a spokesperson declared. But skepticism remained among activists and the public alike. The veteran, despite being thrust unwillingly into the spotlight, remained a voice of calm amid the storm. His measured words carried weight not because of their volume, but because of the integrity behind them. "This isn't about me," he insisted repeatedly. "It's about what's right." One day, a young reporter asked him, "What kept you going all these years?" His answer was simple yet profound. Hope. Hope that one day, respect would not need to be demanded but freely given. Hope that stories like his would become relics of the past rather than reflections of the present. As public pressure mounted, small but meaningful changes began to unfold. Training sessions were revamped, focusing on eliminating implicit bias among TSA agents. Veterans organizations collaborated with airport authorities to create programs that recognized and honored those who had served, ensuring respect was woven into every interaction. Beyond institutional reforms, something deeper was taking root. A shift in awareness. The story served as a catalyst for introspection, pushing people to confront their own assumptions and biases. Travelers became more attuned to what they witnessed in public spaces, no longer willing to turn a blind eye to injustice. Despite these changes, the veteran understood that the road ahead remained long. True transformation required not just systemic adjustments, but a cultural shift, a change in how society viewed each individual not by race or status, but by their humanity. The turning point arrived not with grand speeches or sweeping declarations, but with quiet transformations in the lives of those touched by the veteran's story. Airport officials, initially defensive, began acknowledging the deeper implications of the incident beyond procedural error. They recognized the need for meaningful reforms and invited the veteran to participate in discussions aimed at reshaping their approach to security and respect. Though hesitant at first, he agreed, viewing the opportunity not as validation, but as a chance to foster real change. "If my story can help prevent this from happening to someone else, then it's worth telling," he said. During the first meeting, agents and administrators listened intently as the veteran recounted his experience without bitterness, but with a firm resolve for fairness. He spoke of the dignity that every person deserves, regardless of status or skin color. His presence challenged long-held assumptions and encouraged honest conversations about racial profiling and unconscious bias. These discussions led to a pilot program that paired TSA agents with veterans advocacy groups for cultural sensitivity training. Through stories, historical context, and firsthand accounts, the program emphasized the importance of treating every individual with respect and humanity. Initial skepticism gave way to earnest engagement as agents began to see their roles through a new lens. One agent reflected during a session, "I didn't realize how much my assumptions shaped how I did my job." Hearing these stories changes things. Beyond the airport walls, the ripple effects continued to spread. Veteran stories of resilience and quiet defiance began to surface, each one adding depth to a collective narrative long overshadowed by silence. Communities held dialogues on race and recognition, fostering spaces where voices long unheard could finally be acknowledged. In one such forum, a young Black veteran recounted his own experiences of being treated with suspicion despite wearing the uniform of his country. His voice trembled as he spoke, but his message was clear. "We fought for this country. Too. It's time the country fights for us." Meanwhile, social media fueled a growing movement calling for reforms in how veterans, especially veterans of color, were perceived and treated in public spaces. The hashtag honor and respect trended for weeks, with stories of courage and calls for change shared far and wide. The veteran's own account became emblematic of a broader fight for justice and acknowledgement. The changes weren't just confined to policy and awareness. The veteran himself underwent a transformation of sorts, not in his values, which remained steadfast, but in his sense of purpose. His journey had never been about seeking recognition, but he now understood the power of his voice to inspire progress. Standing before a packed auditorium at a national veterans event, he addressed the crowd with the same calm determination that had carried him through the hardest battles. Respect is earned on the battlefield, he began, but it shouldn't have to be demanded at home. The audience, a mix of veterans from all backgrounds, erupted in applause. His words resonated deeply because they spoke to shared truths, truths of service, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of equality. The veteran's story, once a singular incident in an airport, had sparked a nationwide conversation. While prejudices still lingered, progress was undeniable. Veterans of color who had once walked unseen through society now stood taller, their stories no longer overlooked. Months passed, and while the media frenzy had subsided, the impact of the veterans' journey remained deeply rooted in public consciousness. Airports nationwide continued implementing reforms aimed at curbing discriminatory practices, while broader conversations about race, respect, and service endured in community forums and policymaking discussions. For the veteran, life resumed a semblance of normalcy. He never sought fame nor accolades beyond the one resting quietly on his chest. His actions weren't fueled by the need for validation, but by a desire for fairness, not just for himself, but for those whose voices often went unheard. One crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived in his mailbox from a young soldier stationed overseas. The letter, handwritten with care, expressed gratitude not for his battlefield heroics, but for his courage in confronting injustice. "You stood for us when we didn't have the words," the soldier wrote. "Because of you, maybe the world will see us differently." It was a sentiment echoed by countless others, young veterans, activists, and ordinary citizens inspired by his quiet defiance and unwavering dignity. He had become a symbol not just of bravery, but of transformation, proof that even small acts of resistance could spark profound change. The veteran's hometown, too, underwent a transformation. The local airport, once a site of painful memory, unveiled a new mural in honor of all veterans, depicting not just their sacrifices, but their resilience in facing challenges at home. Community members gathered for its dedication, voices united in reflection and hope. As the veteran stood before the crowd, he looked around and saw the faces of fellow veterans, each carrying their own stories of hardship and triumph. He raised his voice not for himself, but for them. "This isn't just about changing policies," he said. "It's about changing hearts. It's about building a world where respect isn't conditional, but constant." The crowd erupted in applause, not out of duty, but from genuine admiration for the man who had quietly but powerfully made his stand. As the ceremony concluded, he lingered at the mural, fingers tracing its edges. The journey was far from over, but in that moment he felt something stir. Hope that perhaps the battles waged for dignity and respect might one day no longer be necessary. Walking away from the mural, the veteran knew that while the past couldn't be rewritten, the future still held countless possibilities. And in that future, his story was no longer just his own. It belonged to everyone striving for a world built on fairness, recognition, and respect. For him, that was victory enough.